Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic, and I'm a host to these TechTonic Conversations, a series of live webcasts that I've been hosting to bring to you, my audience, conversations with interesting, wise uh, people who practice the art and science of technology and technology leadership. So on this channel, we talk about emerging technology, enterprise tech. We are interviewing technology founders and entrepreneurs, but also we are interviewing technology executives, those who are actually shaping and leading their organizations towards a better future. And this morning, I am thrilled to welcome Robbie Madan to the conversation. Robbie, thank you very much for your time.
No, thanks, Dalibor. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Robbie is actually a technology executive based out of Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta, and the CIO of CanadaOne Auto. But Robbie has a very, very interesting career that I would love to hear more of. So, as those who follow this program know, I tend to not introduce my audience. Instead, my first question is to actually ask you to tell us your story, how you navigated your life and your career to now be the head of technology at CanadaOne Auto. And for those who are following us live on this Thursday, June the 5th, 2025, if you have any questions, please, of course, feel free to submit them using the Q&A function of this Zoom platform. So with that, Robbie, the floor is yours. Tell us the story of Robbie.
Perfect. Thanks, Dalibor. You know, I think when I look back at my career, I've had a very interesting career, but a lot of it really started by understanding how I grew up and kind of my love for technology and how that kind of accelerated the direction I took my career. So I'm going to take this way back and talk a little bit about how I grew up, right?
Yes.
And how my passion for technology really started. So, growing up as a kid, I was never really into sports. My daughters like to tease me a lot, saying, I can't do the three S's. I can't swim, I can't skate, I can't ski, which is ironic considering I'm born and raised in Edmonton. We're a winter city. We should be
Oh
able to
no,
do
I
these
know.
things, right?
Actually, I fully empathize with that, Robbie. By the way,
Okay. There-
I can't skate either.
Hopefully you can swim or ski
I
or
can
one of those.
I can
There you
float.
go.
I have high buoyancy, so I
Okay, there you
I
go.
almost can't help it. I float.
Oh, I love it. But they love to tease me about that, right? But growing up, one of the things I did spend a lot of my time with is in front of the different technology devices. I remember the time when my dad brought the first computer home. It was an Apple IIe, and
Wow.
a lot of people talk about the infrastructure, right? They like picking it apart, understanding how the motherboard works. How do I add more RAM to this device? How do I do things like that? I actually took a very different approach. I actually wanted to learn how to make this thing do what I wanted it to do. And I learned how to program at a young age. So I started learning, I think it was Basic back then or Assembler. I can't remember which one. I think Basic. But that really sparked my love for technology, right? Loved making these devices do what I wanted them to do.
Mhm.
So that was my early kind of exposure to it, was my first Apple IIe computer. And I always knew that I wanted to work in tech. You fast forward a couple of years when I was looking at going to the University of Alberta. It's, what are you going to do? Like, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Mhm.
I asked my daughters that question right now. My oldest daughter just started high school. She's in grade 10, and we're already having these conversations about, what do you think you want to do? What options do you want to take? But when I look at my career, it's kind of funny because no one ever asked me that question. Everyone just knew it's Robbie. He's going to go into technology.
Yeah, it was
That's
obvious.
just
Yeah.
growing. It was natural, right?
Yeah.
Um, so when I entered the U of A, I went to the comp sci program, and I obviously took a couple of years to went through that program. But one thing really interesting that stood out to me at that point was I started developing this passion for business. So the U of A offered a comp sci major with a business minor. So I'm like, let me do that. I want to go see what this program's all about. So I started taking a lot of courses around economics, like macroeconomics, microeconomics, all that stuff, accounting, marketing. And I found that I just fell in love with that side of it as well. So I think when I look back at my career, that intersection between technology and business started in the university days for me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So coming out of university, my first couple of jobs, I focused very heavily on development. I was doing web development, middleware integration, just the typical software engineering tasks, right? But
Yeah.
naturally, I just found myself growing through leading larger teams, through kind of just that natural organic ability to lead. I started overseeing larger and larger projects, shifting from development to just broader leadership roles and becoming a senior architect.
Yeah.
And then I had an opportunity to interview with Microsoft.
Mm.
And Microsoft was doing something really interesting because it was a new line of business that Microsoft had started in the US and they were expanding out here to Canada called Premier Support for Developers, PSFD. Um, and that role to me was a little interesting because it wasn't just about being technical. That entire program was about helping software developers develop better quality software using the Microsoft tech stack. So how do you do better unit testing? How do you do better paired programming? How do you use agile methodologies in your project? And so it had a combination of a lot of process oriented things. It had a combination of the hands-on technical, where I was paired doing code reviews with developers at different client sites. But it also had that aspect of building a business line
Mhm.
because they had newly launched it here in Canada. So for me, it was a perfect blend of hands-on, which I love, and it's a blend of strategic leadership and
Yeah.
coaching and process that I've
And
been looking
education.
for.
And I'm going to
Uh,
assume part of this was you educating and helping people understand the promise of that Microsoft stack technology. So there was an education component to it too, right?
Huge education, huge training component of it, right? And for me, that's really where I started to see a lot of drive in my career was moving in that direction. So Microsoft offered me a couple of different opportunities. One, it also gave me the opportunity to see how technology was used across so many different clients, right?
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
go to any big consulting company like that or product company like that, Microsoft being both, you get to see everything.
Mm.
So across Western Canada, and some of my clients kind of bordered out to Eastern Canada, I got to see almost every vertical and how technology was being used. And I think I learned two really pivotal things about myself during that journey at Microsoft. And first one being the fact that my passion had changed. I went from being a developer, an architect, and being hands-on writing code and designing systems to really moving to being a coach, a mentor, a trainer, an educator, and focusing on process and how do you do build things in the
Mm.
right way. That was kind of my first real thing where I said, okay, I want to get out of the tech scene, not the tech scene, but I want to get out of the being that technical person and elevate my own game.
Hmm.
The other thing I learned that was really interesting was while I love being on the consulting side of the business, real change in an organization also requires that you be embedded in the organization to help
That's true.
like shepherd it through,
That's
right?
true. That's
As
true.
a consultant, I think, and I'm sure you can attest to this, you're usually brought in for projects, start and end dates. You're brought in to do a very specific thing. Rarely do you get the opportunity to see something through over the course of years and really shepherd that and change that culture of an organization. So I realized that while I was at Microsoft, that those two things really appeal to me, right?
Yeah.
So I made a real big decision at that point to pivot my career and move out of consulting and move into industry.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but there were a couple of things to me that came alongside that because I think in order to be successful in industry as a leader in the technology sector, you need to understand the business. So at that point, I decided I'm going to take my MBA.
Ah, yeah.
So I took my MBA mainly to get a deeper understanding of different concepts within business, whether you're talking financial statements, marketing strategies, supply chain concepts. I wanted to, in my own head, be able to bridge the gap between technology and business. So I spent a couple of years, took my MBA working at the same time, which was quite a bit of a challenge as my daughters were both born around that time. Um, but I knew that I needed that to
Yeah.
really push my career to the next level. So after leaving Microsoft, I had an opportunity to join a company called Liquor Stores North America.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they were a retailer in the liquor sector. They owned about 250 liquor stores across Canada and the US at the time.
Hmm.
But they really needed some help in modernizing their systems. They needed help in rebuilding the technology teams that were there to implement the modernization. And I thought it was an amazing opportunity to take everything I had learned as a consultant, take the learnings that I got from my MBA program and apply it to now a real industry
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
ended up joining them. And that was literally my last decade of my journey. I didn't never thought I would stay at a company for that long, to be honest with you. I think as we're all kind of focused in the technology sector, we tend to jump into organizations, say we have a 3 to 5 year life cycle, and then
Move
move
on.
on to the next thing,
Typically,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
But during my time at Liquor Stores North America, I had so many pivots and interesting challenges that I'm like, okay, I'm enjoying this. This is fun. This is challenging. I get to
Awesome.
learn something new, right?
Yeah.
And retail in itself introduced me to so many challenges in my career. I got to adapt to different technologies, adapt to
Yeah.
different personalities. It honestly turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. Not only did we perform huge technology changes with ERPs, migrations to the cloud, I had the ability to gain so many experiences outside in the business sector as well. One of the most interesting things that people like to talk about is when Canada legalized cannabis, right? In
Yeah.
2018, cannabis became legalized, and I had the opportunity to launch a whole brand new industry. And how many people can say they've actually had that opportunity to see an industry launch from the ground up? So I had this interesting thing where we had to pivot. We had on one hand of our business the liquor sector, which is a bit more legacy. It's been around for a while. Technology is quite established. On
Yeah.
that side of the business, you're really trying to improve things. You're trying to build a better mousetrap and make it more efficient and operate better. But then you had this emerging cannabis industry where everything is net new.
Yeah.
Everything is going to the latest and greatest right out of the gate. So you
Mhm.
get this fun kind of, you have to keep your mind, you have to focus your mind on which line of business am I really talking about here, because they're two exact opposites that are going on. Um,
And it's
yeah,
all under the same organization, right? So you've got
all under the same
the
organization.
symphonic
So
orchestra has the rhythm section that's been playing for many, many years, the rhythm, and then suddenly you got synthesizers showing
yeah,
up.
it is. And it turned into literally cannabis turned into the wild, wild west, right? There were no established processes. Everything was being built from scratch,
Yeah.
and the technology was evolving so rapidly. We had to, like, being successful in cannabis, especially on the technology side, meant you had to be walking arm in arm with your operations team because every decision was moving so fast,
Yeah.
right? And we had to make sure that we had quick decision making, we were prioritizing, we had to have a level of trust in order to move forward. Like, I'll never forget actual legalization day in 2018 when I think it was 12 midnight or whatever that law came into effect. And across Canada, you had stores opening up. You had lineups outside of every store. You had celebrations. It turned into
Yep.
like a concert. You had music going.
Yep.
All over the news, you saw the first customer to make a purchase across Canada. And in the back of my mind, I'm sitting here just holding my breath because we opened 5 stores that day.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting here like, oh, please, our point of sale systems, I
Please
don't want
work.
them to crash. Just they have to work.
Oh
I
my
don't
God.
want to be the retailer on the news saying, oh yeah, they opened up, but their technology didn't work because they couldn't process a single transaction, right?
Yeah.
It was an interesting time because the technology that we used in our cannabis stores we picked technology that was not what everyone else was doing. We did not pick technology that was like coming up and comers in the cannabis industry. We had to pick technology that supported both lines of business.
Ah, okay, I see.
Because at the end of the day, you're still having a shared services in the end that has to be able to be efficient, right? So if you have a finance team looking at all the journal entries and all the stuff in the background that are coming up from these stores, or a marketing team or a supply chain team, you don't want them learning multiple systems.
Yeah, of course.
So we made a choice to maybe use a standard system. It wasn't cannabis specific, so we had to customize it to ensure it met regulatory compliance rules. But wow, that day was scary.
I can
Because
involve.
right, when you make that decision as a CIO, you have the world resting on your shoulders, especially with the amount of media that was on there, right? And so
And
that
it
taught me a lot about taking
and it
risks.
went well.
It went well. It went well. It went really well, and the cannabis line grew from 5 stores to about 170 for that company over time.
Wow.
So it went really well. It all operated on that same system, but it taught me a lot about taking risks, but taking risks for the right
Yeah.
reasons, right? And partnering with your business. Um, other parts of that decade that really resonated with me, I think everyone would talk about COVID and the challenges that COVID introduced during that time frame. For me, it was quite unprecedented. It was so interesting because we all know COVID accelerated everybody's timelines on how we rolled things out. Things that were 1 or 2 years ended up getting compressed into months,
Yeah.
enabling remote work, collaboration tools, you name it, it all got compressed. Um, One interesting thing that happened during COVID for us that I think really cemented our trust with the business, though, was the fact that one of our highest revenue stores in Toronto ended up, when Ontario changed the rules during COVID, they only allowed click and collect. And this was our highest revenue store, but it didn't have e-commerce enabled. They could not do click and collect. So they had to shut their doors. I remember my team getting together and we're like, how do we solve this problem? There's got to be something we can do because we had jobs on the line.
Yeah.
We had a lot of lost revenue. There was no loyalty in cannabis, so customers would just go to someone else. We didn't want to lose that. In the span of about 3 days, we spun up an e-commerce site for that entire cannabis brand, and they were able to open their doors we started it on Thursday night, I remember. On Monday or Tuesday morning, we launched it, and they were back in business.
Very
It
good.
was a huge success story about how fast you could turn something around when necessity hits, right? And
Yeah.
COVID drove that necessity across the
Yeah. Yeah.
board.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think there was one other pivotal thing during that decade, and then I'll kind of pause on my intro. I had a really interesting opportunity at the company. So we had built a lot of trust and a lot of relationships with the business. And during that time, there was this conversation about how technology and marketing, digital marketing, were intersecting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we had an opportunity and I kind of pitched, why don't you let me take over marketing for the company?
Hmm.
And they agreed. So here I go as a CIO, and I'm taking over the marketing department. I'm learning about how social media campaigns work, how flyer campaigns work, how to target specific customer audiences. But it was such an interesting pivot for my career because I had the trust of the business as a leader to take on this whole business portfolio for both the liquor and cannabis lines of business. And it was such an interesting part of my career getting out of that technology shell and putting on more of that business hat, right?
Mm.
And I think through that pivot, I learned a lot more about e-commerce, home delivery, partnerships with Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes. It was just such an interesting experience for me.
That's fascinating.
Right. So
Right.
not only did I get to do the CIO gig, I got, I guess, we called it a chief digital officer at the time, but it was just a nice pivot for my career overall. So I think, after that decade in retail, I ended up transitioning to where I am now in automotive retail, and I'm
Hmm.
looking to apply all of those same learnings to a whole new industry.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I am now.
That's such a fascinating story. Thank you for
Yeah.
for telling us this story.
No.
Uh, you talk a lot about You talk, and I know that you talk a lot about leadership and importance of being a leader, being seen as a leader, acting as a leader, focus on culture and team. Has there been any pivotal moment in your career that actually shaped your approach to leadership?
Um, so I think there's been a couple of things in my career. One of the things that I quote quite often to a lot of people is I actually think technology is the easy part, right? I think as technology leaders, the implementation of a new system, a new solution, um, there's a lot of products out there that we can use. There's a lot of ways of custom building something. So I always say that technology is actually the easy part of being a tech leader. I think the harder part is leading people and
Yeah,
building that culture of innovation, accountability as we try to evolve and mature an organization. So I think throughout my journey, I've had a couple of key opportunities to learn from different leaders and different styles of leadership, right? I find a lot of leaders that have shaped my career. You have two kinds of types of leaders. You have those that are driving change through sheer willpower, right? The bold, aggressive leaders stand in the front of the room and just drag people with them. But one of the things that I found that really resonated with me and I think shaped my career are those leaders who really understand people, right?
mm,
True leadership isn't about forcing change, in my opinion, not from the top down. It's about influencing people and meeting them where they are
yeah,
and helping to influence their ability to move forward.
yeah. I love it.
Or
The leadership is not about forcing change; it's about
yeah,
influencing people.
yeah,
Yeah, it's about yeah.
yeah.
It's or if I was to restate it, it's about inspiring change instead of forcing change.
Inspiring change 100%, right? And I think early in my career I had a CIO that I worked with who introduced me to this concept, and maybe some of the people out there have heard this term before, but I never heard the term shelling the beach before, right?
Sorry, what? Shelling?
Shelling the beach.
Okay.
So it's an interesting term that I've never had been a part of. So, I had to learn what this concept was about. And this early tech leader, she was a CIO at one of the companies, and she kept telling me, we got to shell the beach. It's the easiest way to get rid of the resistance to change, right? So I started thinking about it, but it's a really simple concept at the end of the day. It's about softening resistance. And
Yeah.
before you introduce new ideas, you have to soften the resistance, right? Um, the actual phrase comes from the fact that, during the wars, they would
Oh yeah.
send artillery fire across to weaken defenses,
It's
right?
a D-Day. I got a D-Day in my head picture, of course.
Yeah, there you go. So the concept she introduced me to was this: just before you start introducing a lot of change, have a lot of informal conversations, a lot of
Yes.
one-on-ones with people,
Yes.
and give them an opportunity to give their feedback into the idea, right? Like never do that as just a surprise. Don't try to stand in front of the room and just drag people with you.
Yeah.
Make sure you have those informal conversations, and those informal conversations allow you to address a lot of the why are people resistant to change, and therefore reduce the resistance and break down those barriers. So that is something that I've taken to heart and I start doing every single time there's a
That
big
is very true.
transformation. It's shaped how I lead. It's shaped how I chat, I discuss with my peers when new ideas come up. Everything comes into this concept of shelling the beach before
Yeah.
anything happens. So I've taken that forward quite heavily through my career. Another leadership thing that's kind of evolved or that I've taken to heart and I've tried to practice over and over again is a really defining concept that our CEO at Liquor Stores North America put in place. And he had this philosophy that the head office only exists to serve the stores, right? Not the other way around. In
Yeah.
retail,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
head office is only there to help your stores
Yep.
profit,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, and to be honest, we never even called it a head office. We called it a store support center because that's what we were there to support the stores. So during peak seasons, like especially during Christmas, Boxing Day, we actually made sure the head office staff spent time on the ground. Whether you're the CIO, CFO, COO, you're in the store, stocking shelves, helping customers. It didn't matter what your title was. everyone contributed to this. So I took a look at that kind of culture, that mindset, and it's something that I've adopted across the board, right?
Yes.
When I enter retail, especially in the retail sector, one of the first things I always try to implement is the fact that everyone on my technology team should understand what our business is about. Whether that means you go down and work with the sales staff on the floor, whether that means you're sitting with the accounting department and
Yeah.
understand what their processes are. And that includes everyone from service desk employees to infrastructure
Yeah.
people to applications. You need to know what it's like to be a frontline employee to
Mhm.
help serve the
I love it.
business,
Yeah, I love
right?
it. It's not
Uh,
it's not know the business. It's not know it's feel the business.
yeah, you have to create that. It creates a level of understanding, a
Yeah.
level of empathy,
Yeah.
a level of accountability for
And
the
it takes us
work
from
that our
theory
employees.
into practice.
Yeah,
Like, so you can
yeah,
intellectually know what a store person does. You can intellectually understand each step of the process.
yeah,
It's a completely different experience when you actually get to be there and do it yourself or see it happen yourself and observe how they actually interact with the technology that you're supporting
a
from
hundred
some
percent.
head office. Like I love it. I think it's right on. It's right on.
You know what it also creates is this concept of like when you're sitting in and I never use the term ivory tower, but when you're sitting remote to
Yeah.
any of your store locations or anyone you're supporting, you don't know what they're really going through. And
Yeah.
so I look at retail and I'm like, you might have someone phoning you and there's a customer sitting across from them yelling at them because
Yeah.
something's broken or they can't log into a system. So put yourself in that person's shoes and understand that if they're frustrated on the phone with you, there's probably a reason for that too. Something triggered them. They might have got yelled at by a
Yeah.
customer. They might have lost a transaction because of it, whatever the case. But creating that level of empathy and putting people in the end customer's shoes creates a whole different mindset when you're now
Yeah.
supporting that
Yeah.
customer,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Makes
So
it very personal and
yeah,
makes you feel as like I completely understand what you're saying, and I think you're
yeah,
100% right. And I
mhm,
think that a lot of technologists and IT departments actually are missing this opportunity. This should be common practice everywhere,
yeah.
right?
I agree.
Everywhere.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yes. I love that you
100%.
brought this up.
Yeah,
So yeah, the way I refer to it is you mentioned earlier I need as a CIO, I need to know the business. I agree. This is a way to go a step further, to actually know it and feel it and understand what it actually is to be in the system that actually delivers whatever the good or services is. That takes it in a completely different level of appreciation and understanding and empathy and compassion, and therefore it compels you to, I think, come up with better solutions ultimately.
100%. And I think there's one thing that most organizations always do, or one thing I've always done when I've entered an organization is I look at the culture of the IT group that's there, right? And what's the business partnership with that IT group? Are they a
Yeah,
reactive group? Are they truly a partner to the business or not? How are they even referred to?
yeah,
Because a lot of like one thing that I've done, we did it at Liquor Stores North America. I've already done it at CanadaOne Auto, is we actually don't even refer to our team as IT anymore. We
mm,
refer to our team as business technology.
yeah,
And the reason put the title business in our department is our department is striving to be a partner with the business. We want to feel what the business is going through. We want to contribute to the top line and bottom lines of the business. We want to be a true partner. We don't want to just be, hey, just call us when something breaks kind of mentality. That's why we get in front of the business. That's why we sit in their shoes. We need to understand what they're going through, right? It's about being a strategic partner to them,
mm,
not just that IT group in the
yeah, yeah.
background,
Very
right?
good, very excellent,
So,
excellent. So Robbie, given that you shared quite a bit about your background and how you navigated your career and your retail experience in cannabis and liquor. Now you've spent about a year and a half in auto industry.
yeah.
I'd be curious to know, like, from what you've now observed, Like what do you see are would be your, biggest challenges and obstacles? What are the cool strategies? Are there some cool tech that you are piloting? Like anything that would be of interest potentially that you can share from your current role and experience?
Yeah, for sure. Um, so as you mentioned, I've been about in the automotive retail sector now for about a year and a half. It feels a lot longer than that, I'll be honest with you. I feel like I've been doing this for a while. Um, but joining automotive retail is very different, right, than some of the liquor and cannabis retail that I've been working on in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you enter an organization, I'll go back to my statement, the technology part of it is easy, right? You can map out the technology, how the systems talk to each other. You can map that out really easily. But coming into an organization and understanding the business itself is what takes a lot of time, right? Understanding the business and the people. So during my last year and a half, a lot of it has been spent on making sure I understand what drives the business. Automotive retail, unlike traditional retail, a single dealership actually drives about five different individual businesses within it, each with their own processes, a lot of them with their own systems, and some of them quite fragmented and don't talk to each other. But
Yeah. Yeah.
within the walls of a dealership, you have like new and used car sales, which a lot of people wouldn't think are very different, but they're actually very different processes and
Mm-hmm.
very different ways of running that line of business. You
Mm-hmm.
have a service department, you have a parts department, you
Yeah.
have finance, and insurance. You also have, in a lot of our dealerships, you have body shops and detail shops and those sort of things that add another new element, right? So again, each of these operates its own systems. You need to learn about that. Each of them has their own processes and leadership that you need to know what drives them and what drives their goals, their revenue as you move them forward. Um, it takes a long time to get a good handle on how this business works. The other thing that I like to do when I look at CanadaOne Auto is really around what's the industry look like? How has the industry evolved over time? And if you look at automotive in general, automotive at a macro level has really become the growth of the auto groups has really come from a lot of fragmented single point dealerships, and a lot of them have grown through M&A activity over the years.
Yeah.
Now, that's introduced a lot of its own complexities when you look at the industry because every dealership comes with its own technology stack. Every one of those five lines of businesses within each of those dealerships could be running a whole different technology. So you need to figure out how this works and how you can scale as the industry is consolidating. It's
Yeah.
quite fragmented today. I've actually talked to a lot of other industry, my peers in other parts and other competitors to us in Canada and the US, thinking, I'm like, okay, is this a normal thing in the automotive industry? How fragmented everything is. And when you look across the landscape in Canada, it is the same thing for everybody. Everybody is facing that same challenge of fragmented systems, very little standardization across the board. So, unlike other retail sectors where you have a lot of standardization, everyone is moving really quickly because they're dealing with the same systems across the board. You look at clothing retail, you look at home decor, pet supplies, you name it. They're usually working with a standards platform in place. So, they're already working on accelerating their technology to the next level. And so when I look at automotive, it is evolving over time, but it's evolving at a slower pace than a lot of these other industries.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that drives that is the fact that the customer behavior when they're buying a car, you look at that, and that's for most people the second biggest purchase in their life,
Yeah.
right? Besides
Yeah.
their house. So
Yeah.
they take that buying cycle is quite a bit slower
And long. Yeah.
and it's extended versus what we look at in, say, my prior life in liquor and cannabis, where if you had a technology issue, the customer in the store, if the point of sale machine didn't work or the internet went out or a power outage, the customer would just drop their basket and go to the store next door and
Yeah.
buy their stuff, right? Versus automotive, that's not the case. The reliance on technology is a lot smaller. So that evolution cycle takes a lot longer. So I think for most people, when I look at automotive, I came into the industry to disrupt it. That's always the goal of any CIO, right? You have these aspirations of you're going to make a significant impact, you're going to make a significant change, and you want to disrupt the entire industry.
Yeah.
But the reality of the automotive industry is it's a much longer cycle to do that.
Mhm.
So you have to make sure that you're prioritizing the right things as you move forward. Um, we've all heard the term digital transformation, and I think it's become a bit of a cliche now because we just use it for everything out there,
Yeah.
right? But I've really bucketed retail digital transformations into four key areas, right? I look at a bucket of customer engagement where you're focused on technologies that are improving the customer buying, the customer purchasing experience.
Yeah.
You look at employee engagement, which is
Yeah.
improving the employee internal engagement with the company and their processes. Operational optimizations, which is like your infrastructure and your back office efficiencies. And then the fourth bucket to me is always about reimagining technology. That's where your R&D comes in. That's where you research
Yeah.
and you're looking at the newest and greatest things out there. So in my role today, I'm still sitting in that bucket of operational optimizations. I'm working on replacing the foundation across the board. We're looking at standardizing a lot of the technology across our dealerships
Yeah.
to make sure the networks are stable, we're secure. We essentially, I want to build a platform that we can then build up on
Up
top
on
of
top. Yeah.
as we move forward,
Yeah.
right? So my focus right now is heavily in that area, but not to say we experiment quite heavily with AI. We experiment quite heavily with different engagement techniques with our customers. But the key area for now is fixing the foundation to make sure that Canada One has a platform that we can essentially maintain for years through sustainable growth as we do more M&A activity.
Yeah.
And that foundation will then give us a competitive advantage to quickly accelerate all of the other technology
Yeah.
that we want to start introducing.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um,
Very good. And as you describe this complexity, like you said, each dealership might have five different lines of business, each with potentially different technology. You got 40 dealerships times five, like you potentially have 200 different
yeah,
or similar function but different technologies to actually orchestrate towards ultimately, ideally, a single common platform. That's quite
100%.
an undertaking.
It's such a big undertaking for a smaller team to have,
Yeah.
right? Could you imagine? So when I entered the organization, a perfect example of this is I'll use the example of phone systems as a technology.
Yeah.
You own 42 different dealerships. You imagine having 42 different phone systems running across those 42 dealerships. And then you have a centralized service desk that is trying to maintain each of those phone systems across the board. And it's not possible.
Yeah.
You times that by, 10 different, 15, 20 different types of technology that's running in each of these dealerships, you're running into the hundreds. How do
Hundreds.
you really, how do you equip the team to do that?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
unless you're willing to invest millions and millions into a team and get hundreds of people there, each with a very unique skill set. It doesn't work for
Yeah.
organizations today, right? So yeah, the goal today is really to try to fix that problem and get us to a point where it's a really stable
Platformizes.
foundation. Yeah,
Platformizes.
exactly. Yeah,
Exactly.
100%.
Very good. Very good. So Robbie, I also wanted to get your thoughts on the role of the
Mhm.
CIO, technology executive. Um, we are obviously going through a period of dramatic change in technology-driven change that is impacting our economy, society. I I would love to get your perspectives on how have you experienced the role change, and perhaps even more importantly, where do you think the role is actually heading?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the role of a traditional tech leader has been one where the traditional tech leader has been focused very heavily on just that core foundation level of an organization. So they've been focused very heavily on the core infrastructure. the networks, the switches, that plumbing type infrastructure, and being very operational in nature and just
Yeah.
reacting to a business, right?
Stability, reliability, resilience kind of thing, right?
Exactly. And I think the the traditional tech leader was focused on really just delivering projects, right? And just getting them out the door versus being a true what the future tech leader is. And I think where we're evolving to today is truly being that strategic partner to the business and being at the, I guess I'll use the term, I know it's people say it all the time, but being at the table and being a part of the discussions about the business and how to use technology to enable the business, right? I actually see the tech leader as being an orchestrator, right? You use the example of a symphony and all those sort of
Yep.
things earlier, and I'm like, a tech leader needs to be that person who's orchestrating everything across the board. So you're going to have to still, as a tech leader, know all the newest technology. You have to know AI, you need to know data. You're going to need to know those up and comers that are really disrupting the industry and changing and how to prepare your organization for that change, but you're also going to need a tech leader who understands business strategy. You're going to need a tech leader who understands how to implement change management. And I think one of the most important attributes of a tech leader is going to be EQ, like emotional intelligence. Everything now, the way I look at the world is regardless of what title you hold, whether you can be a CIO, a CTO, Chief Digital Officer, whatever that title is, the tech leadership is changing to be a people-centric focused role and less focused on the details of the technology, right? You still need to know it, but it is a people-centric role. One of the things that I've always talked about in a lot of my teams is that the role of a CIO and the role of a technology department is really becoming the role of what I call a chief dot connector.
Mm.
The technology team at the end of the day is in the middle of everything going on in an organization.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
no department today that doesn't use technology,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
So you are the bridge to everything going on. Typically, you know every process, you know every system, you know when people are coming and going and leaving an
Yeah.
organization. You are
Yeah.
that main central function. You are the hub of everything. So as a leader, you need to use that kind of function or that power to now help drive the business because you have the oversight across the board to
Yeah.
see what no one else is seeing, right? There's blind spots and different functions. You need to bridge the gap of those blind spots going forward.
Yeah.
And that's why I like using the term chief dot connector, because that's really
Chief,
what we
yeah.
become.
That-
Um,
yeah,
one
that's a
thing
good
that
way to describe it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think, I was thinking a little bit more about this a couple of weeks ago. Something popped into my head, and I'm kind of thinking, I wonder if as the CIO role evolves over the next 5 to 10 years, are we going to start seeing CIOs move into the CEO
Yeah.
role,
Yeah.
right?
I, I,
Just
I,
because of
I
that.
think that I think quite frankly that is the opportunity in front of us.
Yeah.
That is the opportunity with so what you described is a role that has deepest understanding of how the business actually runs
Mhm.
because every component, every angle of the business is technology enabled. So you have like the baseline knowledge of the business has to be there. And
Mhm.
that really is very powerful proposition. Unlike almost every other role that has, tower of its responsibility,
Yeah.
tech executive role like, touches everything. So
Yeah.
the I think that the difference is going to be those who are able to show up as business credible business executives on
Mhm.
top of that knowledge are the ones who are positioning themselves to actually realize that potential,
A hundred
right?
percent, 100%. There's very few departments in an organization that I think have that wide a breadth across an
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
So I think you like outside of potentially your CFOs where finance is obviously across the board in almost every department. I think there's no other role that is positioned to really move to mature into a CEO
Yeah.
role, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting thing. I haven't seen a lot of it, or I can't actually think of any example off the top of my head right now where you've seen a CIO to CEO transition. But I
There
do
are
believe that's what's
actually
coming.
there are some. I'm aware of at least few. I know that, for
Okay.
example, previous CEO of Sancor was a
Mhm.
technology computer science uh,
Okay.
leader. I know BCLC, for example, in British
Mhm.
Columbia, their current CEO was a CIO, right?
Okay.
So there are examples of this happening, but I think
Mhm.
that we are moving towards that world where the the business savvy technologist will be a very credible candidate to take
Mhm.
over the enterprise, right?
Yeah. I think we're going to see more and more of these
Yeah, and I think that
examples.
like as there's almost a shift from money is the ultimate object or the ultimate resource to money is an enabling resource, but the ultimate objective is a client relationship that is, going to stay and carry us into the future. So, you know, what CFOs used to be the obvious candidates for CEO roles in the past, but I think in the future it will be those who understand information and data,
Mhm.
right? So to me, that transition is also occurring at the same time.
100%. I 100% agree with that.
So now, can we? So thank you for sharing this. I actually agree with you 100%. Um, how how does one define success, therefore, in a role of a tech leader today and tomorrow, versus how that success was defined in the past? Any sort of reflections on that?
Um, I think a lot of it, again, I'll go back to kind of my previous statement on CIOs of the past were more measured by the delivery of projects, our ability to execute projects,
Yeah,
delivering on time, delivering in budget. I think a lot of that is changing now. I think the success of a tech leader is really going to be not about what you're building and what you're delivering. It's about what you're leaving behind, right? And it's shifting from
mm.
those deliverables to the outcomes that you've left behind for an organization. So I think
A
about
legacy
it,
kind of a
the
legacy.
legacy, right?
Yeah,
How satisfied were your customers? Were you creating a seamless experience for your internal employees and your customer base in the terms of retail? Were you creating an experience for them that made their jobs easier and more efficient? From a market growth or business growth perspective, were you able to align the technology with the strategic objectives of the organization? Were you able to use technology to enable new revenue streams and new growth streams? And then even from a culture and development side, were you able to build a culture that thrives and a culture that innovates? Were you able to leave that
yeah,
behind, right? So
love
I
it.
think, I think our success as tech leaders is, I use this term all the time. I like always saying, I like to work myself out of a job, but when I leave that job, I want to make sure that I've left it in a state that just thrives, right? So
Mm.
it's not about scaling platforms to me. It's about developing processes, teams, systems that can essentially carry on after you leave and you still have that culture, that innovation that's there. So I think that's what
Yeah,
we're going to
very
be
good.
judged by.
And I now recall you mentioned you introduced in our conversation a framework that has four elements of
Mhm.
how you view the role itself, and you said, you know, improving experience of the consumer of the
Yeah,
goods, people who are the source of our revenues,
yeah,
improving the experience of people who work within the organization, number two, number three, optimizing the actual operations of the business, and number four, introducing new things like thinking about the future and evolution of the future, modernization and so forth. So these four you could almost become the new scorecard, balanced
yeah,
scorecard of the impact of technology leader, right?
100%, right?
That's
Because I think That's exactly what we're really trying to do now, right?
Yeah,
Where it's not about, I've implemented a lot of ERP platforms, I've implemented migrations to the cloud. Yeah, I've been successful at each of those. But what do you really get measured at is not did I deliver it on time? Did I deliver it under
yeah,
budget? It's about what was the experience of implementing that and how easy is it now for people to use,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think
So
that's exactly
yeah,
where we're going.
so the metrics are moving from tactical operational ones to much more strategic and business relevant ones, right?
Mhm.
The outcomes and impact,
Yeah,
lasting legacy, culture that is different. Those are the measures of success.
100%. And I think those are the same measures that a lot of our business executives live by today.
There
And
we go.
now you're seeing technology go into that same category of the impact and the outcomes. And we're measured at the same level as any other business department.
Hmm.
So,
Very good, very good. So Robbie, I typically end my conversations with a question on like based on everything you've experienced, based on all like a career that now I'm going to guess at least more than 2 decades. I would suggest three
yeah,
decades. In the
pretty
third
close.
decade, what would be the advice you would give to someone who is looking to start a career in technology with the aspiration to become a technology leader, tech executive?
Um, I think there's two things that I've learned in my career that I think everyone should take into account. I think the first thing is the fact that we really should not be afraid to take risks. Like, don't be afraid to take a risk. Don't be afraid to experiment. Even failure in when you're more junior in your career is a learning experience, right?
Yeah.
For myself, now I think in my career, I've taken a lot of risk. I've made a lot of choices, always very educated choices. I was always mitigating risks. I was never putting a business in danger, but I did take a lot of leaps of faith to move to a leading edge technology or choose a path where it was a bit more risky, but it had the right outcome in the end. Personally, I'm a bit more, sometimes I get stuck in analysis paralysis kind of mode for a lot of things in my personal life. But I do think as a career path, and I think what will accelerate a lot of people who are looking to grow their careers to become leaders, there's an element of taking risks that will help get you there faster because you learn faster and you learn faster from your mistakes.
Mm,
Sometimes it comes
yeah.
back to bite you, and sometimes it hurts, but it will get you there faster.
Yeah.
The other thing I would kind of give some advice out there or for people to think about is really relationships matter in this business. I think we can't just, as technology people, you grow your career, you come out of school. If you're a programmer, developer, software engineer, or in the infrastructure side, any of this, often people just want to put their heads down and do their work, right? They put their headphones on and they just want to be given a task and just go with it and
Especially
deliver.
technologists.
And
Especially
yeah,
technologists.
we are the
Yeah,
most introverted group out
I was
there,
just gonna say
right?
we all are. Like I actually am an introvert too, although I
Yeah,
make myself available publicly through this. I actually am an
yeah,
introvert, right?
yeah,
This is such an important thing that you just mentioned.
yeah. And I think, I was talking to someone who just started their career recently. They just graduated from the U of A. They got their first internship. They're in their first job. And the first thing I told them was just don't sit at your desk all day and do your tasks. That's not how you get recognized. That's not how you become visible. Building those relationships will carry you through your entire career, and you never know where you can go with them. Understanding the business, make a point to have a coffee with someone from the business that you wouldn't normally talk to, right? Because you never know what you learn. Right? So I think those are probably my two biggest points that
To
I would take from this.
have the courage to try things that may be considered risky, because quite frankly, you will either win or you will learn, right?
Yeah,
Um, understand the importance of relationships with people and approach them with curiosity.
100%.
Very
Really
good.
good summary. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Whoops.
There we go. So Robbie, this was wonderful. I want to be respectful of your time. Of course, we are coming to the end of this conversation. Thank you very much for the wisdom you have shared. Congratulations on an outstanding career so far. I very much look forward to staying connected and seeing where you take, where you take CanadaOne Auto next. Um, and for our audience, of course, this conversation will soon be published on the TechTonic Conversations YouTube channel, so you can review it or share it with your friends. With that, Robbie, thank you so very much, and have yourself a wonderful, lovely Thursday.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Delbert.
All the best. Bye bye.